Good morning. If you want, you can go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 14. Luke 14. That's where we'll be this morning. It's good to be back with all of you. What we're talking about this morning is a subject that I struggle with. Struggle with it now, struggle with it for my whole life. It's the topic of pride. I think we all probably struggle with it to some extent, right? Just natural to live life with myself at the center. It's all about me, myself, and I. Even as babies, from the very beginning, we cry when we're hungry, we cry when we're thirsty, we cry when we're tired, and it's all about me, right? If you're a parent, you've experienced that. We're naturally about ourselves, and it doesn't necessarily get much better as we get older. It can. We have more free will, right? We can choose to be better, but it doesn't naturally become like that. Even as we grow physically, we don't necessarily grow mentally or emotionally in terms of pride. It's still natural, even as we grow. So I want to ask you, everyone in the room, starting here, right? I want you to honestly consider this morning, just be open to the possibility that you are prideful. That just maybe you struggle with pride. And that just maybe you're the most arrogant person in the room. Because one of us is, right? One of us is the most arrogant person in this room. And if you're like me, you automatically are looking at other people when that sentence comes out. But just be open to it. Is that me? Can we get to the place where we can say, maybe that is me. Maybe I do struggle with pride. Maybe this text that we're going to study today, maybe this is God speaking to me through this text. Because this is exactly what I need. We'll study this morning. We'll study it tonight. Probably have another sermon or two on Luke 14. Just we'll see how far we can get. But maybe this is what I need, Luke 14. And let me just say that if you can't say that, if you're not even open to the possibility that it could be you, you're probably prideful. We'll solve it for you right here, right? If you can't even consider it, this is probably what you need the most. Because it's so natural, and it's so sneaky. It's not necessarily the guy who just obviously thinks that he's better than everybody else. He has this huge ego. Everybody can see it. It's not necessarily that guy. It probably is that guy, but that's not necessarily how pride reveals itself. It can also reveal itself in someone who says, I don't think that I'm all that. That's strange, but it's true, because even when I'm saying that I don't think that I'm all that great, I can be walking around in life saying, I'm pathetic, I'm helpless, I'm wounded. Everybody come look at me, listen to me, help me. It's all about me, right? That's pride. So I can be insecure and incredibly prideful. I can be self-conscious and just be absolutely bursting at the seams with pride. Because it's still all about me. But that's not what we were created for. That pride, that self-centeredness is the opposite of what it means to be human. Because in Isaiah 43 verse 7, God says that we were created for His glory, not for ours. I'm not created to put myself at the center of my life. Neither were you. We're created for His glory. That's why in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31, Paul says that whether we eat or drink or whatever we do all to the glory of God. That's what it means to be human, truly, in its fullest extent. Not to live for ourselves, but to live for Him. As John says in John 3 and verse 30, He must increase and I must decrease. It's all about Him. It's about His glory. Now the Pharisees, here in Luke 14, they completely missed that point. They were living for themselves. They were important. They were intelligent. They were influential, and they knew it. And they fell in love with it. They couldn't give up. They couldn't see past their own importance. And because of that, because of their love for themselves, they hated Jesus. They hated this one who's absolutely perfect, right? He's absolutely selfless and humble in every way. And that light shone on their darkness, and they hated it. They hated him for it. He was this new kid on the block who's getting all of the attention. So he's not popular with them. In verse 1 here in Luke 14, we see something strange given that. It says that one Sabbath, he went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees. So he's eating a meal with them. This theme of food, one of the reasons I love this chapter, this theme of food keeps popping up over and over and over again. I love food, right? So this is where it begins. Here in verse 1, with him going over to this ruler of the Pharisees' house to have a meal. Now, this was nothing out of the ordinary for a Jew. Their culture was a lot like ours traditionally has been. Traditionally, we go to the Sunday morning service, and then we go and have a big meal afterward, right? Sunday dinner. Most, or some of you probably grew up, I've heard from some of you, I know some of you did, grew up going to Sunday morning service, and then your mom or whoever would cook a big meal afterward, a bunch of people would come over. That's what it's been traditionally, even in our culture. It was the same in their culture. They would have their Sabbath service at the synagogue, then they would come home, and they would all have a big meal together. So this was normal. It was especially normal because Jesus was a visiting rabbi to this area. He's this teacher who's come to the area, and so just like here, when somebody comes here, someone always makes sure that a guest speaker is taken out to lunch afterwards. Just common courtesy, right? It's the same there. So this visiting rabbi, this visiting teacher, Jesus, comes to town. So someone's going to take care of him. Someone's taking him to their home for lunch afterward. So this was normal. But really, this is everything but normal, right? Because this is a Pharisee. And the Pharisees don't want to show Jesus hospitality. They don't want to welcome him into their homes. They don't want him to feel comfortable. They want him silenced. They want him gone. They want him to be obsolete. So why in the world is this ruler of the Pharisees, one of their leaders, why is he inviting Jesus into his home for this meal? Well, I think we get a hint as to why in this last phrase in verse 1. It says that as they're at this meal, they were watching him carefully. They're watching him carefully. It's kind of creepy, right? Well, if I just picked one of you to stare at for the rest of this sermon. Sorry, Jim, it's you. I'm just going to stare at Jim for the rest of this sermon. That's weird, right? So why in the world? And it's even weirder if you're across the table from someone. If one of us goes out to lunch afterward and it's a big group and I just stare at you the whole time, that's really strange. It's creepy. So why are they doing this here? Well, flip back a few chapters to chapter 6 in Luke. Chapter 6 and verse 7. This passage is similar to ours in Luke 14 in a lot of ways. Once again, it's the Sabbath. Once again, he's with the Scribes and Pharisees. And just like we're about to read in our chapter, there's a man here who needs healing. So there are a lot of parallels here. But there's also something else that's similar that I want you to see. Luke 6 and verse 7. The Scribes and the Pharisees, here it is, watched him. So that's similar. Now, why are they watching him here in Luke 6? To see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they might find a reason to accuse him. So why are they watching him here in Luke chapter 6? To find a reason to accuse him. They're looking for anything they can find in Jesus' life to bring him down because they hate him, remember? So that's Luke 6. But I think the same thing is happening here in Luke chapter 14. They want to see him mess up. That's why they're watching him. And that's why he's invited in the first place to this house of this person who hates him. That's why he's here. It's a trap. They're waiting for him to say just anything that they can take to the people and show him and show them that he's not all that they really are the important ones. That's why he's here. That's why they're watching him, because they want to get him. So verse 2, behold, there was a man before Jesus, who had dropsy. Now, dropsy was a very, very painful disease where your body's tissues filled up with water. So incredibly debilitating. It was not fun at all. And this man, because of his disease, would have been an outcast in the society. They looked at people who had diseases as great sinners. That's why they got the diseases, because they sinned. Now, that's not true, but that's how they viewed it. So this man would not normally have been with the Pharisees. They were too good for him. They didn't want him around, much less at a meal with a visiting rabbi, this important teacher coming into the area. They didn't want to be affiliated with this man. He shouldn't have been there. I mean, yes, he should have been, right? From our Christian conception of love and graciousness, we want to welcome everybody in, even especially the ones that society marginalizes. But the Pharisees didn't really operate like that. So why is he here? Well, he's here as bait. The trap is set. Just like in Luke 6, here in Luke 14, there's a man here who needs healing. And so now Jesus is in this dilemma. Because if Jesus doesn't heal this man, even though he could, he has no compassion, right? Everybody can see that he's a miracle worker. So if he doesn't heal this guy who needs it, even though he can, he doesn't actually care about people. He's just pretending to fool the people because he wants to get famous. So there's one side of this dilemma, one horn on this dilemma. The second horn is that if he does heal him, he's in big trouble. Because remember that this is the Sabbath. And if you know anything about Jewish culture, you know that the Sabbath is a really big deal. It was their day of rest. You don't touch the Sabbath. You don't mess with the Sabbath. You rest on that day. Now, you're not supposed to do anything. And healing this man of this disease that he's had for who knows how long feels like a pretty big thing to do on any day, right? Much less on the Sabbath. So if Jesus does that on this day, well, he's impaled on the other horn of the dilemma. So what is he going to do? He's in the situation where there's no winning. Either he heals the guy and he's stuck healing someone on the Sabbath, so they can accuse him of that, or he doesn't heal the guy and he doesn't have a heart for the people who need him the most. So he's stuck on that. So what does he do in this situation where he can't win? Well, in verse 3, it says that Jesus responded to the lawyers and to the Pharisees. Now, what's he responding to? If you look back at verses 1 and 2, they haven't said anything. So why is he responding here? Because Jesus knows what they're up to, right? He knows their hearts. He knows why this particular man is in this particular place at this particular time. It's because they're using him. So he responds to them and he says, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" He turns their predicament back on their own heads. Because now they either look hard-hearted or they are approving of breaking the Sabbath laws. So he's right back at them, right? Their very same dilemma that he was in is now on them. Because now this man who they're using, this man who they wheeled in here, dropped before Jesus, making use of his pain, manipulating this man's situation for their own gain. Now, he's right there in front of them. They can see the pain on this man's face. They know that he needs healing. And what do? Well, in verse 4, they remained silent. But they remained silent. So the Pharisees had a choice here. They had a choice on which side of the dilemma they would go with, and they chose to remain silent. So they made their choice, but they chose wrongly. They chose me, myself, and I over their integrity. They chose their status over service, and they chose their law over love. And that's really where Jesus has a problem with them here. They chose their own law over love. Then he took him, and he healed him, and he sent him away. And just like that, with zero fanfare, this is not a big deal in the text at all, right? He took him and he healed him and sent him away. Just like that, this man's life was changed forever. I mean, Jesus actually absolutely transformed this man's life every day. From then on, every second was completely different for this man, right? It just took a second with Jesus. And everyone saw it. This was not something that Jesus was hiding. Remember that they're watching him carefully. So they didn't miss this. But they didn't do anything in response. If you look through the text, just absolutely no response. I mean, if I did this up here today in front of all of y'all, right? If I healed someone who everybody in this room knew was handicapped, y'all would go crazy. I mean, y'all would be wondering what I got into over at PTP, right? and every one of y'all will be there next year because you want to know what happened. But here, they saw it. They're watching him carefully. They didn't miss it. It didn't slip by them. But absolutely no response. And they're, at least externally, because internally we know they responded. We know that because how could you not respond to something like that, right? But we also know it because of what Jesus says next. But we know from what Jesus says next that their internal response was, I don't know if that was okay. I don't know if what Jesus did there, healing this man on the Sabbath, I don't know if according to the law, that was acceptable. Jesus might have sinned there. might have done something wrong. Because after all, this is the Sabbath. This is our law. You don't mess with the Sabbath. You can see why they would think like that, right? Because they had this law. You can see that. I can. But apparently that's not how we're supposed to respond. Because in verses 5 and 6, Jesus says to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" So which one of you guys, you religious leaders, if your ox or your son falls into this well, you're pulling him out, right? They know the answer to this question. It's a rhetorical question. At least it ends up being, because the next phrase is, "and they could not reply to these things." So whether he meant it to be or not, it ends up being a rhetorical question. But they know the answer. Of course, they're getting them out, right? If they're getting their ox out, that's their well-being. That's their livelihood. They're taking him out. If their son's in, what are you going to do, Tread water for a day. No, you're taking him out. They know what they're doing here, but they don't want to say it because they see the dilemma that they're in. And this guy had nothing to offer them. Think about it. In that situation where your son is in this well, you're in the same dilemma on the Sabbath. Your son's in the well on the Sabbath. They're in the same dilemma, whether they help someone or keep their Sabbath laws. You have the same exact dilemma there as they have here. But the difference is that they actually care about their son. They don't care about this guy. What does he have to offer them? He's just an outcast of society. He's just a guy with a disease who has nothing that he can give to them. So why would they care about him? Because remember, they're all about themselves. Now, how awful is that? That's the type of person that we all look at and we detest, right? We all look at that kind of person who looks at someone who needs help and doesn't help them because of their own self-interest. And we say that is literally the worst type of person. So at this point, we're probably all feeling pretty good about ourselves, right? Because we're looking at these Pharisees and we're like, well, yeah, I would help the guy. I mean, I can't heal him, but I would say that Jesus should heal him. So we're all probably feeling pretty good. But then in verses 7 through 11, and we won't dwell on this for very long because this will be our text for tonight, but I want us to read it because here Jesus turns from the Pharisees to the regular people. And he says that the same problem that is the reason why the Pharisees won't help this man, it's the same problem why you do a lot of the things that you do in life. And he's saying that to them, but if I can say it to us, and especially with me, I think it's one of the reasons why I do a lot of what I do in life. Because of pride. Because I'm all about me. So before we move on to verses 7 through 11, I don't want us to miss the point of 5 and 6 and the verses that we've read so far. That if our law keeps us, our laws that we make for ourselves, our laws that maybe we take God's word and we say, I think it means this, and so I'm going to operate on that, or I think it can help me. That's one of the things the Pharisees did on the Sabbath, where they would say, you're not supposed to work on this day, right? So they would define what work was. They had these incredibly strict laws about how you could even wash your hands on the Sabbath, or else it's work. So that's what they're doing. They're adding to God's law. So if I take the Bible and I say, I think it means this, and then I bind that on everybody else, or I'm adding on to the law, I'm guilty of exactly what they're doing here because it just speaks to my pride. I can say, look, I know better than you, and so you have to obey what I do. I mean, sure, the Bible just says this thing that we're not supposed to do, but I think that it would actually help you not do that thing if you obey what I say. I mean, don't get close to sin, right? That's the exact logic of the Pharisees here. They say, look, the Bible says don't work on the Sabbath. And we don't want to get anywhere close to working on the Sabbath, so you have to do your life. You have to live your life this way. If we live like that, if we bind our own consciences, if we bind our own laws that we add on to God's law on other people, we're doing the same thing, and we're guilty of pride. But even more than that, something that is really day-to-day is what Jesus says here in verses 7 through 11. He tells them a parable to those who were invited, so to the regular people at this meal, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor. I mean, who wouldn't? If you're faced with a choice of sitting in this seat that makes you look good, or sitting in this other seat that makes you look like a loser, I mean, I know what I'm choosing. I'm sitting over here, right? I mean, if you have these two options, where one of them is honorable, one of them is shameful and embarrassing, I know where I'm sitting. But apparently that's not how we're supposed to react in that situation. Because Jesus says, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. And here's the big principle that Jesus is getting at here. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Just like these Pharisees here, every one of us has moments in life where we're faced with a choice. In fact, these choices happen every day, right? Some of them are big, some of them are small. But we're faced with these choices of what's better in a certain situation. So, I can choose either to be on time for Bible class, which is a good thing, right? Being on time for Bible class. I can choose that. Or I can choose to stop and help someone on the side of the road who's stranded. Now, that's probably not where you thought I was going with that. But being on time for Bible class is a good thing, right? Not bad. But there's something more important. As disciples of Jesus, as people who are trying to be like him, we want to be here for Bible class. We want to study his word. But even more than that, like Jesus says in Matthew 23, there are weightier matters at play. There's love and graciousness and humility and service and justice and holiness and righteousness. Those things matter more than my pride. Helping people matters more than my being embarrassed because I walk in late, right? So I can choose in that situation. I say that because that thought came to me because I've been in that exact situation, and you have too. I was driving over here on the loop on the way to Bible class, and I didn't stop because if I'd stopped and helped the guy, I was going to be late. Thankfully, not today. You know, it was a long time. I'm a much better person. I know. But seriously, though, that's a real life situation. And I think this is a proper application of what Jesus is saying here. Where it's good to be in Bible class. We should be here. But sometimes there are more important things. Like somebody who needs help. So I can choose one side or the other on that. I can choose to look down on people who come into our assemblies and they maybe look different than me. Maybe they talk different than me. Maybe they just seem different than me. I can look down on them. Or I can choose to love them like Jesus did. I can choose to love them no matter what. And I can choose to adapt what's comfortable for me to what's comfortable for them. Because that's love. I can choose to speak up for someone who can't speak up for themselves. Or I can choose to remain in my comfortable silence. I can choose to fake like I have everything together. Because that feels better in the moment, right? Nobody likes to be embarrassed. Nobody likes to admit that we're bad at something. I can choose that. Or I can choose to confess my faults to you guys. Because then we can care about each other. We can pray for each other. And this is what James 5:16 tells us. Confess your faults to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Now why? Because when we're praying, when we're righteous, and we're praying to God, that prayer has great power as it's working. If there's a sin that you're struggling with, that you've been struggling with for a long time, maybe it's pride. But any sin that you've been struggling with for a long time, one of the very first places I would look, if you just haven't gotten over it, or if you don't even care about it anymore, one of the very first places I would look, if it's my life, is, have I told people about this? Have I told my brothers and sisters about this? Because that's what James 5:16 tells us to do, to confess your faults to each other. Because when we know about each other's weaknesses, we can pray for each other. And that prayer is tapping into the power of God. And that's why we have great power in prayer, because it's God. So I can choose either to keep my pride, or I can choose to confess that I'm weak. And really, I think it's important for us to talk about, where it's not always, and not mostly, the biblical conception of confession is not mostly you coming down to the front pew and telling everybody about something you messed up. Sometimes it is that. Sometimes it is you've done something wrong in front of everybody or in front of a lot of people here, and you need to come down and tell people you realize that you've done wrong and you're repenting and asking for forgiveness, right? Sometimes that's good. But the biblical conception of confession is not mostly that. Mostly, it's a day-to-day practice. Or we talk to each other in like normal people, and we say, hey, I struggle with this thing. I struggle with pride. I struggle with greed. I struggle with lust. It's just talking to each other in normal conversation. That's what it's about. Because sin loves to live in the dark. This is why we have 1 John 1:7. Walk in the light, confessing your sins to God and to each other. Because sin just thrives in the darkness. If you're struggling with something like pornography, you know one of the reasons why you can't get over it, most likely, is because you haven't told anybody about it. You're not accountable to anybody. It's thriving in the darkness. Because sin loves the dark. So if we shine the light on it, it makes a big difference. On that note, I think one of the reasons why pride is such a problem for so many of us is because we just don't think of it as that big of a deal. It's just a little arrogance, just a little dash of pride, right? But in Proverbs 16 verse 5, Solomon tells us that everyone who is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. And then he has this phrase that's terrifying to me. He says, though they join forces, none will go unpunished. Everyone who is proud in heart is an abomination to God, and though they join forces, none will go unpunished. Our word abomination means that pride is disgusting to God. It's abhorrent. He sees the pride in our lives, and he goes, ugh, it's nasty. Now, I don't want, and you don't want, the image of God looking down at me like that, right? That's a pretty big deal. That would change a lot of things about our lives. But we don't look at pride as just this awful sin. In fact, when I started this sermon by getting up here and telling all of you, hey guys, I struggle with pride, I didn't really get any weird looks at all. None of y'all were looking at me and just shaking your head like, can't believe you, right? You all kind of looked at me like, yeah, we figured, we knew. That's kind of how this worked. But what if I had gotten up here and said, guys, I've really been struggling with lust lately. I mean, it's really bad to the point where I'm checking some of you out, right? Okay, that's creepy, right? You're looking at me, in that situation, you're looking at me like a totally different person. And for a good reason. I wouldn't blame you if you avoided me for a while, at least, after that, right? But I think that if we focus on some sins as worse, and I think that's okay. There are some sins that are worse, right? There's a difference between telling a small white lie and doing something. We all know the horrific things that happen in the world. There's a big difference between those two things. But if pride isn't on this side, if pride isn't on the side of abhorrent to us, then I think we're missing it. Because pride is the root of all of the other sins. Everything comes from pride. Because every sin is about my choosing myself over God and over you, or over you. It all comes back to me. Every sin is about me. So it's about pride. So if there's one sin that should disgust us in our lives and in the lives of each other, if there's one sin that we should just absolutely be sold out on murdering in our lives, if there's one sin that should scare us, it's this one. So am I the type of person who strives after servanthood? Do I just desire to be a servant? Do I desire to have the lesser place instead of the places of honor? Am I that type of person? Or am I the type of person that when I'm going to a car, yell shotgun because I want that place, right? Or am I the kind of person who just takes the middle back seat, the literal worst seat, where you're stuck in between everybody? I take that seat. Not because I'm some saintly martyr who just is so good, he's better than everybody, and so I want everybody else to know it. Not because of that, but because I just genuinely don't think about wanting that best place. I genuinely want what's best for everybody else. Now, that's not natural. Like we said at the beginning, that's not normal for us. That's not expected of us. But it is how Jesus lived his life. Jesus was the type of person who said, hey, you know what? I want everyone else to eat first. At the fellowship meals, at those sacred potlucks, I want everyone else to go through first. Jesus was the type of person who said, you know what? I'm not going to park at the closest parking spaces to the door because I want you to have those. That's the type of person Jesus was. Jesus was the type of person who said that I don't want the best pew seats. And if someone takes my assigned pew, I know that's a terrible sin, right? If someone takes my assigned pew, then I'm not going to be frustrated or anything like that. That's the furthest thing from my mind. In fact, I'm going to view it as an opportunity to go up to that person and love on them. Just show them the love of Jesus because I'm going there anyway, right? So I might as well go up there and say hi and ask them how they're doing. That's the type of person that Jesus was. And as his disciples, as Christians, whose the purpose of our lives is to become like him, that's how I have to be too. I have to be the type of person who says, you know what? I'm letting love win out. I'm letting humility win out. Letting mercy and grace win out over myself. Now, if there's something that you need to make right this morning publicly, please do that. You'll have an opportunity to here in just a second. But pride is not normally something that is just abundantly public. It's normally something that takes root right in here. And it takes its grip on my heart. And for a lot of us, a lot of people in the world, it never lets go. But this morning, God can free you of that. That's how this works. Something that you can't do by yourself. The power of God can come into your heart and change. So as we sing this invitation song, this song of encouragement, yes, think about public sins that you may need to make right. But even more than that, think about the words and how they apply to your heart, to my heart, and ask God to come in and change what may need to be changed. Let's sing together as we stand.